Good morning, everyone. I hope your day is going well. Welcome to the final episode of me analyzing characters from the Amazing Digital Circus. And it's probably not a very big surprise that I've saved Jax for last. Jax is a character that started the series divisive and has only become more controversial from there. And with the finale coming out, there's been even more discussion about her. A lot of people have something to say, but through all of it, I've seen a couple common viewpoints and ideas emerge. There are some that I agree with, and others that I really don't. And that's what we'll be addressing in this video. The first section will be an analysis of the final episode, where I lay out my thoughts on Jax as a character and what's going on in her head. Then we'll take some time to address common phrases I've seen getting thrown around. Phrases such as, "It became the Jax show after episode 5, and Jax deserved to abstract." I generally try to be somewhat objective in my analysis most of the time, but this video is probably going to end up being a lot more opinionated than usual. And I hope that all of you will enjoy seeing that side of me. If you've enjoyed this series and want to see more of my videos, please consider subscribing. I have a lot of ideas for the future, including a rewrite of the second FNAF movie, and I'd love for you to be here for them. I'll also be making a long compilation of this character analysis series, so if you're looking for something to put on while you do your laundry, keep your eyes open for that. And if you'd like to have a more direct discussion about this video with me, feel free to stop by my after-party stream on Twitch, starting at 11 AM PDT. I hope to see you there. With all of that said, I think it's time we get started. Grab some water, whatever it is Jax was hungry for in the pilot episode, and get comfortable. Let's talk about Jax. It's been kind of interesting to see public opinion of Jax shift over time. Don't get me wrong, there have always been fans of Jax, but it felt like in the pilot, a lot of people had this idea that Jax was the classic archetype of jerk with a heart of gold. In my experience, this is a very popular archetype in fandom, so it's no wonder that people assigned her this role. People had this idea that all of her actions were secretly benevolent, with some even thinking that all the teasing and antagonizing was a calculated strategy to keep people distracted and away from abstraction. And it was an idea that people really latched onto. And then episode 2 came out, and a large portion of the fan base was very put out that their favorite jerk who actually cares deep down didn't seem to be caring that much.
Gangle, when we catch up to him, I'll jump over, crawl inside, and shoot him repeatedly until they're unrecognizable. Nice going, Pomni. Now I have no bridge. What? I blame you for this. I'm so unbelievably disappointed right now.
Well, maybe there'll be blood, death, and violence in the next adventure.
Ha 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 ha, how wholesome. Let's take this dumb truck to the dumb kingdom, I guess.
Jax had been built up in the minds of many for nearly 8 months as someone who was secretly a softie, whose jerkish behavior would be relatively mild and excusable. And then the episode came out, and these expectations were very much not met. I'm not a fandom historian, so the reaction maybe wasn't as pronounced as I remember, but it really felt like people were getting super mad that Jax wasn't immediately turning out to be the version that existed in their heads. Even though at this point, that angry exterior, soft interior idea wasn't really supported by the show at all. Mostly because at this point, we didn't know much of anything about the characters. And this specific idea was almost entirely a fandom creation. People were getting angry about Jax changing, but really Jax hadn't changed at all. She was pretty much exactly the same as she'd been in the pilot, and that was the exact problem that people had. I'm not bringing this up because I want to make fun of anyone or make them feel bad. It was only the first episode, and the series very well could have eventually gone this route with Jax if it wanted to. Everyone was just figuring out their own interpretations, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm instead bringing it up because I think it showcases a fandom's tendency to get attached to versions of the character that don't really match the original source material. Everyone is entitled to their own interpretations and headcanons, but there's often a difference between fandom interpretation and reality. And that often gets lost when a fandom gets big and the body of work is relatively small. I also bring it up because this isn't just something that happened between episodes 1 and 2. The reaction was never quite as pronounced as this first time, but as each new episode came out, it felt like it became less and less popular to just like Jax as a character. Jax has always been popular, but with each new episode, the group of diehard fans seemed to get a little bit smaller. Jax would do or say something that pushed people over the edge and had them turning to other characters. It became less and less common to see someone talk about liking her without some sort of justification. And I honestly think that this was by design. With Gooseworks' comments about only the strongest Jax fans making it to the end, it feels very intentional that Jax often doesn't manifest characteristics that make her easy to like. It's easy to like a rude character if you're assuming that there's some good underneath that. But when a character absolutely refuses to show you any of that good, or in some cases actively sabotages themselves, it becomes a lot harder. Exactly why Jax is written as a character to be kind of unpleasant is something that I'll get into more as we go along, but I just wanted to point out that this isn't being done randomly. Jax is specifically written to be surface level dislikable, with good traits that she is actively trying to smother out, and that's not an accident. The ultimate consequence of this writing decision is that by the time the finale happened, Jax was under a lot of scrutiny, and people were waiting for an explanation for her behavior. And let's get into that explanation, shall we? With Jax abstracted, there's nothing left to hide. We eventually get to see in full who she was before and how she ended up here, but it doesn't start that way. Before we get to the truth, we need to get through the doors. And by doing that, we see various facades that Jax has meticulously built to make sure that no one ever looks too closely at what's underneath. Within Jax's mind, we run through 3 different scenarios, showing us how Jax would react to different circus members dying. Or rather, how Jax has decided to cope with the idea of them dying. Because I think it's safe to say that in the actual circus, if any of these people had abstracted, none of these scenarios would actually be playing out like this. The toxic, angry part of Jax that sees her fellow circus members as constantly out to get her, blaming her for everything and thinking they need to fix her, is putting them into roles they wouldn't have in real life, at least not in this exaggerated way. This is happening so she can justify how each of her masks would cope with the situation. Jax is doing her very best to convince herself that if any of these people died, she really wouldn't care and would go on living exactly as she had before, when we come to realize that that's really not the case at all. I think part of the reason that this stands out to me as so blatantly fake is the fact that Gangle is wearing her manager mask. Not only is she wearing it, but she's wearing it in a subconscious reality that Jax created. Jax knows, somewhere deep in her mind, that this is not how Gangle would act in this situation. Gangle does not act like herself, at least not fully, when she's wearing this mask. She wouldn't react this way to Zubal's death, and she certainly wouldn't react this way to Jax coming on to her. But this is the way that Gangle needs to act for this moment to exist in the way that Jax wants it to. Gangle needs to be acting in this strange, off-putting way for Jax's fake scenario to work. In order to make all of this into something lighthearted, Gangle needs to be something she isn't. So she wears the one mask that Jax knows isn't really reflective of her at all. In a similar way, Zooble probably would be angry and partially blame Jax if Gangle abstracted, but attacking her in this over-the-top Looney Tunes sort of way is not something that they would do. It's an exaggeration to make light of a situation that would almost certainly hurt Jax, even if her relationship to Gangle was weird and complicated. This coping is less of a lie, but it's still not the truth. Not completely. Which brings us to Ragatha's death, and the presence of Pomni. Pomni would almost definitely offer support to Jax if this were to happen, but the scenario is still wrong because of what exactly Pomni decides to say.
I just want you to know that if you need anything, or if you need to talk to anybody, I'm here for you. I know you need it. And I'm the only person who can help you. You need me. I can fix you.
Pomni is a helpful person, she is a kind person, and she's a smart person who knows when someone is feeding her lies and is very intolerant of it. But I feel pretty confident in saying that she would never claim that she needs to fix someone. She's not the kind of person to see someone as fundamentally wrong in their existence. This whole conversation is almost Pomni, but with something wrong about it. And it's because this isn't really about what Jax thinks of the other characters, which is what Pomni assumes. These doors are Jax coping, but they're also a reflection, not of how Jax views the other characters, but of how Jax thinks they view her. Jax has a very warped sense of self, both because of the situation that she's in, and because she spent a long time hiding her true self in an attempt to stay safe. She's terrified of being open because that leads to pain. And she's afraid that what she'd find on the inside won't match what's expected of her. So she's desperately clinging to her own facade, and her view of how others see her is skewed because of it. Jax, on some level, fully believes that Gangle hates her. The manager mask is a mask, yes, but it's also one of the only scenarios in which Gangle doesn't put up with anything that Jax does. So this is both a scenario where Gangle can act completely contrary to how she feels in real life, and express the deep feelings of resentment that Jax feels exist, even if Jax refuses to acknowledge any of them. As I mentioned before, Zooble would probably see Jax's constant harassment as part of why Gangle abstracted and be angry with her. And although Jax in the mind denies it, the fact that she's having Zooble act this way implies that she thinks Zooble is right about that. Jax has expressed that she thinks Gangle likes it when she's mean, but given this scenario, I think she knows on some level that that's just a justification. And finally, there's Pomni. Pomni in the circus has a real connection to Jax. They were genuinely bonding and were well on their way to becoming good friends before Jax backpedaled. Pomni's concern for Jax is genuine, and it continues to be genuine even after Jax claims that they were never friends to begin with. And Jax doesn't see that concern as anything other than condescending, because fundamentally, Jax does not believe that she is someone worth caring about. Jax is constantly portraying herself as the funny one. Even when her jabs and pranks slant into cruelty, that's still the mask that she's ultimately most comfortable with, most comfortable claiming to be, because it's a persona that discourages further investigation. Jax in her mind is a class clown, someone good for a laugh, and not much else. It's an inherently flat gimmick, an excuse designed to make pointed questions slide off with no resistance. Why won't you tell anyone what happens when you hold your breath? Well, I like to keep the mystery alive. AKA, it's funnier if I don't say, so I never have to speak about myself. What exactly is your problem? I don't know what you're talking about. I'm just being funny and you can't take a joke. And please ignore the fact that I refuse to engage with your actual question. Why don't you care about any of this? Because this is just a game, duh. Don't you see how funny this is? Don't you see how funny I'm being? Nothing bothers me because I'm just so funny and cool, and not at all a deeply complex person with emotions and unmet psychological needs.
There's nothing more to me. So please, just stop looking.
Side note, if you have someone in your friend group who's always working really hard to make everyone laugh, make sure to check on them once in a while. They probably need it. Jax's antics are a means of making sure that no one gets too close, both because Jax doesn't want anyone to care about her, and because she believes that she's someone fundamentally unworthy of that care, which means that inherently, Jax does not think of herself as someone worth getting close to. In her worldview, there is no conceivable reason why anyone would genuinely care about her. So when Pomni expresses concern, Jax needs to come up with a reason why she's worried. Because if Pomni's concern is genuine, that would mean that Jax is someone worth caring about, and clearly that can't be true. So when Pomni talks about Jax possibly abstracting, Jax takes it as her blaming Jax for what happened to Kaufmo, which she assumes that everyone is doing, even though we've never seen anyone express that opinion in the show's entire runtime so far. And similarly, when Pomni expresses concern in this dream scenario, it's not because she actually wants to help, it's because she sees Jax as something to fix. A project, something that just needs a bit of tweaking before it behaves just the way it's supposed to. In this false scenario, Pomni is offering help for her own benefit, because fixing Jax would really make her feel a lot better. Jax believes that Pomni must only be nice to her for her own benefit, and once Pomni sees how truly rotten and evil Jax is, Pomni will run away like she always should have, and Jax can rest easy in thinking that she's just as awful and beyond redemption as she always thought she was. Jax believes herself to be fundamentally broken, but not in a way that can be fixed. She sees herself as wholly lost and irredeemable, and does everything she can to reinforce that idea to herself and others, because it's easier than admitting that maybe things could be different. Because it's a lot easier to believe that you're inherently evil than it is to admit that you've been making some really bad choices, and that at any time you could have been making better ones. It's easier to believe that you're always going to be the scum of the earth than it is to admit that you've been hurting people and you need to change. This act might have scared most people away. It did scare most people away, driving away Jax's closest friends and leading to even worse at some points. But Pomni isn't one to take things at face value, and after all the other doors, we're left to talk to the masks directly. And there's an entirely different conversation in what exactly these masks represent. The masks we see are Made Jax, Funny Jax, and Angry Jax. And besides them, there's one other figure in the room that's of note, Piano Jax, who is very important and also not really a mask at all. Pomni asks to see the real Jax, and all three of those at the table are decidedly unhelpful, because they're ultimately masks meant to hide the real Jax from view, And I think Piano Jax is a representation of that real Jax that Pomni is hoping to get through to. Piano Jax isn't literally the real Jax, because the real Jax is a complex mix of all of these figures, put together to form an actual person and not just an archetype. But I think Piano Jax is maybe the closest we get to seeing Jax at her core. It's a Jax who's just a bit softer, just a little bit kinder. Someone who greets Pomni happily and is proud of being able to play the piano, and doesn't feel the need to undercut the accomplishment because she only knows like 2 songs. This is the Jax that, even after everything, wants to let Pomni in. This is the Jax left chained and constantly belittled and repressed by the others, because she represents the soft underbelly that Jax wishes so badly wasn't real. But it is real. If it wasn't, the others wouldn't be trying so hard to tear it down. And I think this part of Jax is one of the big things that's being masked all the time. This perceived weakness is constantly shoved around and covered up, because if you can't get rid of it, at least you can do your best to make sure that no one sees. But what of the actual masks? There's probably about 10 billion different ways you could look at them and what they represent, but there's one in particular that I'd like to touch on. Now, I think there's a reel or two floating around about this specific interpretation, but I first heard about it from my husband, so I'm going to give the credit to him because he's smart and cute and wonderful and I love him. The interpretation I'm referring to is one where at least 2 of these masks are representations of Jax's parents. I don't mean this in the sense that they're literally exactly like his parents were, but masks don't come from nowhere. These are all defense mechanisms of Jax's own creation, they're all him, but they draw inspiration from very specific sources. We don't technically see a lot of these different masks before Pomni poofs them away and gets the full story, but I think we see enough to start seeing the resemblance. Jax's mother is represented with Maid Jax. Jax's mother, from what little we know, is a somewhat unstable and manipulative figure, belittling Jax when she wasn't manly enough and hating her when she was. I don't think it's a coincidence that it's Maid Jax that belittles Piano Jax's ability to, well, play piano. Piano Jax is just excited to share something that she clearly enjoys doing and is proud of. But Maid Jax reframes it to be a selfish and manipulative declaration. She belittles that sense of accomplishment by implying that it's not actually that impressive, and she probably isn't that good at playing anyway. It's emotionally manipulative, which unfortunately mirrors what little we know of Jax's mother and her behavior, where nothing Jax did could ever be good enough. On the other side, we have Angry Jax, the representation of Jax's father. Again, details on him are sparse, but both Jax and his mother seem to view him as a very masculine figure, and in this context, that doesn't imply very good things. Masculinity in this sense is about being big and tough and untouchable, physically dominant and emotionally unavailable, looking down on attempts at connection as condescension. Again, we don't know much about Jax's dad, but with the context that Jax lashing out was her being just as bad as him, I think it's safe to say that he wasn't safe or good to be around. But within this context, what does that make Funny Jax? What or who does she represent? Well, I think she represents Jax's default mask. Jax has always been the self-proclaimed funny one, always ready to respond to any situation in a way that makes you grit your teeth and roll your eyes, so you never bother looking too close.
Everything's way more fun when you play it out in extremes.
Funny Jax is how Jax sees herself. A comedy relief character who no one should care about when they disappear, And once again, it's all in service of hiding that soft, vulnerable part of yourself that you desperately wish didn't remain so quietly persistent. There are other interpretations of these caricatures, of course. Maid Jax can easily represent Jax's internalized misogyny, which she falls back on anytime the conversation is getting too uncomfortable. It's a way of evoking a specific reaction, and of denying Jax's internal dissatisfaction with herself and her gender. Angry Jax could represent just that. Anger at the world and the situation and how everyone seems to think they understand, even though Jax is convinced that no one ever could, because it hurts so badly. The point is, these are all part of Jax, but none of them represent the sum total. Because once again, no matter how much she denies it, Jax is a person, and that's a truth that doesn't go away, no matter how much easier you think it would be to just be an archetype. And that's the entire point of Jax. She is a person, and no amount of cruelty or terrible choices will change that, even if it would make things easier. After being met with all these different scenarios and the different masks trying to keep her away, Pomni is eventually able to enter the final door, and we're finally met with Jax's real backstory. And it's not a happy one. But I think if you clicked on this video, you already knew that. And maybe you're someone who thinks that this backstory reveal doesn't really change anything. You think that no matter how traumatic and sad Jax's backstory is, that doesn't justify her behavior or all of the cruel and unjust things that she did. And you know what? You're absolutely right. Jax's backstory does not make anything Jax did okay, and it doesn't absolve her of the pain that she caused. It could have been revealed that she was raised in a cult of violent murderer cannibals in the style of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and while that might have explained a few things, it still wouldn't have made what she did okay. But here's the thing, that's not what's happening here. This reveal is not attempting to justify what Jax did. Jax's backstory is giving us an explanation for her behavior, yes, but never at any point is it used as an excuse. We are not meant to see what happened as fine just because Jax had a hard life. We're supposed to understand why Jax acted the way she did, and also understand that she didn't have to be that way. There's a trope known as the Freudian excuse, which consists of adding a sad backstory to a villain to give them some more depth. And I think a lot of people tend to view it in a bad light. It's a concept that's probably worth its own video, and let me know if you want to see that. But for our purposes right now, it's just important to realize that giving your villain a tragic backstory is not a bad or immoral idea. Yes, sometimes the Freudian excuse is used to try and justify an antagonist's behavior, but more often than not, it's a lot more nuanced than that. And I don't like how a lot of people seem to view adding a backstory as some sort of dirty trick to try and get them on the villain's side. Yes, a backstory can help you understand and sympathize with a character, but that's not the same as condoning their actions, and I think people need to remember the difference. Jax in the circus was not a good person. There was good in her, and we clearly see that in how close she was with Ribbit and Kaufmo, even seeming to go out of her way to cheer Ribbit up when she was down.
Today's adventure was really fun.
I'm glad I could cheer you up.
But it's the fact that Jax wasn't always this way that makes her later change so frustrating. We see very clearly that Ribbit cares for Jax. Ribbit is a good and caring friend who wants the best for Jax, and is completely willing to accept Jax as she is, and keep this part of her a secret if that's what she wants. They are incredibly close, and we can see how comfortable Jax is around them, even when she's still holding so much back. But her fear of being ridiculed, of having that soft part of herself exposed to the world, is enough for Jax to turn into something completely unlike how she was before. She becomes mean and dismissive and callous, all in the pursuit of somehow making this moment of deep, meaningful vulnerability go away. And the entire time you're watching this, you're just in agony because you can see that this ridicule Jax fears was never going to happen. Ribbit would never have made fun of Jax for this, and even as their relationship falls apart, she never reveals what they discussed to anyone. But because Jax sees that part of herself as something shameful, and she's been burned before, she's unable to take that final step in allowing someone like Ribbit into her life, even though that would improve her life substantially. And the frustration you're feeling as you watch this play out is absolutely, completely intentional. It's a feeling that's slowly been building throughout the entire series as you watch this dumb purple rabbit refuse over and over to just be a decent person.
No, we're not doing this. You're not gonna look me in the eye and tell me nothing we've been doing together meant anything to you, because I know that's not true.
Are you coming on to me?
Aw, come on! Boo! Boo!
And it finally bubbles over when you're shown undeniable proof that yes, Jax could have absolutely been a better person and actively chose not to be. Throughout all these flashbacks, you're intended to sit there gritting your teeth and burying your head in your hands and screaming internally at the screen, because Jax got so close to opening up, and she just continues to shoot herself in the foot over and over and over again. This reveal is so deeply agonizing because it really could have been different, and it's a tragedy because we know that it wasn't different. This is the story we've been left with. It's too late to go back. And the reality where Jax chose to trust just a little more, the one where she might have been happy, the one where she was really herself, is a reality worth mourning. The narrative is not asking you to excuse Jax's actions. It's showing you how it was, and expecting you to understand the inherent tragedy present. This could have gone differently. This could have been better, but it wasn't, and it isn't, and that is horribly tragic and sad. The point isn't that Jax is evil. The point is that Jax is a person, and at any point she could have made different choices. And there is sadness in the fact that she did not allow herself that vulnerability until it was much too late. You can get up on your high horse and talk about how you will never forgive Jax and all of this stuff is totally irredeemable. But if you do that, I think you're missing the point a little bit. You can feel however you want about what Jax did, but whether or not those actions are redeemable was never the point. The narrative is not asking you to forgive Jax, it is telling you that we didn't have to end up here. You can empathize with the struggles of someone without condoning their actions, and that's exactly what the narrative is asking you to do. And if you think that Jax is inherently evil and that there was no other way that she could have behaved, you are falling into the exact trap that Jax has set for you. Because Jax wants you to believe that she is beyond redemption just as much as she's trying to believe it herself. Because if this is just the way that she is, and if there's truly nothing more to her, then she never has to face what she's been ignoring this entire time. And all of this really doesn't matter. And I don't know about you, but I think that this matters a lot. Forgiveness is not an obligation, but that is never what the series was trying to ask of you. And I think it's a shame that so many people came away with the idea that that was the point. And there's one specific idea regarding Jax's abstraction that really bothers me. And that's the idea that abstraction is something that Jax deserved. Throughout this video series, especially in moments when I talk about the possibility of Jax unabstracting, I've gotten comments that characterize abstraction as some sort of punishment for Jax. As we've established, what Jax did was wrong, and no backstory could make how she treated her friends suddenly fine. But as so many of you are eager to tell me, abstraction is pretty explicitly intended to represent suicide. And it makes me really uncomfortable when people will talk about abstraction being suicide, and then in the same breath, characterize it as some sort of divine punishment for Jax's sins. It really weirds me out that so many people in the fan base, including some of you, are so quick to cast this moral judgment. It's like if Jax had actually tried to talk to Pomni, people expect her to reject that and say, "Nuh-uh, you're too far gone. You're a terrible person and need to suffer for what you've done." I don't think we get to make a judgment call on who deserves redemption and who doesn't. And it makes me very uncomfortable that people look at a character committing suicide as something that character deserved in some way. Someone taking their own life is not an indication of their internal morality. It's something that happens because someone is in a lot of pain and needs help. And it feels really gross that people are taking a tragedy and saying it was deserved because they didn't like the actions of a character in life. I'm sure a lot of people will think that I'm being way too serious about this, but I would respectfully disagree. Your opinions on a fictional character don't necessarily say anything about you or how you would treat someone in the real world, but I think there's a big difference between just disliking a character and saying that them committing suicide is correct and proper and the thing that they definitely deserve to have happen to them. I think it's a bit of a weird stance to take, especially when I know that these people definitely wouldn't be taking that stance with any of the other characters who abstract. Because if you're saying that Jax's abstraction functions as a punishment, then you're tacitly saying that every abstracted character deserved to die and is beyond help. Are you really going to look me in the eyes and tell me that Queenie deserved abstraction? What terrible sin did Ribbit and Kaufmo make that made them so unforgivable that they get the same punishment as the supposedly forever evil Jax? And what about the characters we don't even meet? Are we meant to assume that they're all secretly irredeemable too? No, you don't understand, Llama, that's different. Really? How? Because as far as I can tell, the only reason that Jax's abstraction is a punishment and the other abstractions are a tragedy is because people don't like Jax as much. And I don't think that's a good enough reason to view suicide as something karmically justified within the bounds of the story. No, Llama, you've got it all wrong. I'm not wishing death upon Jax for anything she did. I just think Jax stands are really annoying, and I'm glad the character is finally gone. That's nice. Do you understand the point of the story? Can you look up and realize that the narrative is telling you that Jax deserved the chance to be a better person? And it's a genuine tragedy that she didn't try to take it until it was way too late? Do you understand that? Look, you don't have to like Jax. In fact, for most of the story, you're really not supposed to. Out of every character that does rude or cruel or toxic things, she's the absolute worst except for maybe Cain. You don't have to think that she's secretly a misunderstood little baby with a heart of gold. But the core of the story, the entire point of this backstory reveal, and Pomni providing comfort to a character that you could definitely argue doesn't deserve it, is to show you that Jax is a person. Regardless of all the pain that she has caused, she is a person. And the point of this story is that every person ever, even the worst person you know, has depth and complexity and could decide to be a better person if they really put their mind to it. People are complicated and messy, and sometimes they hurt you for reasons you'll never understand. But that doesn't mean that they deserve to feel alone or unloved.
In this world, the worst thing you can do is make someone think they're not wanted or loved.
And it is a genuine tragedy that Jax never loved herself enough to see that she could be better. I know I've been repeating myself a lot in this video, and it's because I just feel like I need to drive this point home. It is extremely tempting in life to try and put things into simple binaries. That's a good person and that's a bad person. It's comforting to think that it could be that simple. Everyone divided into separate categories of black and white morality. But that's not reality.
Oh boy,
Why does that
reality's
matter?
gay.
People are complicated, and sometimes they hurt you, both by accident and on purpose. And although you have no obligation to stay close to people who hurt you, you should try and remember that everyone on Earth is a person who can decide to improve themselves. It might not be your job to push them into doing that, but having empathy for those in your life, even those you don't like, is the key to navigating it without losing yourself to the pessimistic thought that everyone is secretly looking for an excuse to tear you down. People are people, and someone being rude and lashing out is rarely easily explained by inherent evil. And it's stories like this that remind us that life exists not in black and white, but in endlessly varying shades of gray. Yes, TADC is a fictional story, and within fictional stories there can be pure evil characters. But this is not a story about an inherently evil character being karmically punished for their sins. This is a story about a deeply repressed trans girl systematically destroying her own life and relationships because she was so terrified of ridicule that she did not allow herself to exist in a way that didn't hurt. And that is a tragedy, and it's a story worth telling. And it's going to continue to exist regardless of how far you have to twist your head around to avoid looking at it. This isn't the only thing the Amazing Digital Circus is about. There are a multitude of messages to be found in this show, with themes ranging from identity to existentialism to body dysphoria. But it is such an intentional through line that you cannot remove it without the show losing a large portion of its identity and impact. And speaking of which, let's talk a little bit about Jax's presence within the show, and the fact that it didn't just become the Jax show after episode 5. I've mentioned before that I think the Amazing Digital Circus has some presentation issues, and that opinion hasn't changed. Relevant to this section, I think that early episodes of the series gave people an inaccurate impression of what the show would be, and what it was planned to be from the start. The Gangle-focused episode, while really good in its own right, had given people the impression that each character was going to get some sort of spotlight episode. We were expecting an entire episode for Ragatha, and then we'd move on to an entire episode about Zubul, and so on and so forth. And while it's understandable that people would assume that this was how it worked at the time, in retrospect, it's pretty obvious that that was never the intention. I think the series could have done a better job at establishing that Jax and Pomni were the main duo, with everyone else being side characters, but I don't think the series underwent some sort of radical focus shift halfway through, because this has always been about Jax. Think about the different character arcs that we've had, what all of these different characters are going through and learning. All of it comes back to personal identity. Zubul takes on the role of the protector and is very understanding of other people, but it's only when they start to see the value in themselves that they're able to find real happiness. Gangle struggles with masking and trying to be what others want her to be, and eventually learns to love herself and find people who accept her as she is. Kinger doesn't have a traditional arc, but a large part of his story is remembering who he is, and being secure enough in himself to act as a mentor for many of the others. Ragatha is constantly trying to be exactly what other people need, and it's only by prioritizing her own emotions that she's able to self-actualize. Pomni acts as the eyes through which we experience the story, and it's only because she's able to be authentically herself that everyone else feels inspired to do the same. And Cain only returns after he's let go of his ego and become willing to learn from others and grow as a person. Everything has always been about identity, and it's all leading back to the one character who absolutely refuses to face what they've been repressing. Is it a little jarring when the focus shifts entirely to Jax at some point past the 5th episode? You could argue that it is, yes. Do I understand why people might be disappointed that their favorite character didn't get as much screen time as they were expecting? Absolutely I do. But do I think that the focus shifted to Jax because Gooseworks suddenly developed a case of favoritism halfway through? No. In fact, I think it's a little bit silly to call it favoritism when the series was always intended to eventually focus on that specific character. Because the fact is, the show was always intended to eventually lead to this. This finale, this reveal, is the culmination of everything the series has been showing us. Jax could have decided to change. We see over and over and over again how opening up to people and striving to improve is what saves other members of the circus. Connection with others and acceptance of yourself is the key to everything. And Jax could have had that connection, that acceptance, but it was something she never allowed for herself, be it because of selfishness or fear or anger or all of the above. And that refusal to change, to grow, and to let herself exist is ultimately what kills her. It does not mean that she deserved to die, or that she's any less capable of change than anyone else. The only thing it means is that Jax decided that the world was better off without her in it, and that isn't something to be celebrated. Jax's continued stubbornness should be viewed as a tragedy, not as evidence that she could never have changed to begin with. And I think it's a shame that so many people have become convinced that this whole thing is a bid for forgiveness, when that wasn't the point of the writing at all. And I think how the others react to this abstraction proves that that wasn't the intent. We, as the audience, know why Jax was the way she was, and Pomni does too. But as far as we know, that is information that the other characters never learn about. When the others save Pomni and work together to give Jax a comfortable existence in spite of the circumstances, they don't do it because they've suddenly changed their minds about Jax. There's not any moment where Pomni explains exactly what happened and begs the others to help. They don't need to know why Jax was the way she was, because ultimately that doesn't matter. It doesn't even cross their minds to demand those answers. They help because Jax is a person. They're all just human, and what are they if they don't help each other at the end of the day? The pain of Jax's actions isn't forgotten, but its presence doesn't make Jax unworthy of care. It just makes it incredibly sad that it eventually came to this, and all they can do now is try and pick up the pieces. You don't have to like Jax, and you don't have to forgive Jax, but ultimately, the narrative is not asking that of you. All it's asking is that you empathize. It asks you to realize that Jax is still just a person, not some evil monster. And you can empathize with that humanity, even if you find what she did to be unforgivable. Throughout this series, I've had a lot of time to reflect on the Amazing Digital Circus and how I feel about it. And it's become clear that it's a project with many flaws. I think the pacing could have used some work, the world building is often glossed over and unaddressed, and there are some writing decisions that I just plain don't agree with. But for every problem that I have, there are things I love about it too. It's extremely funny, the animation is beautiful, and it was made by real people who clearly loved what they were doing and wanted to bring this story to life in the best way they knew how. And I absolutely love it for that. I think the Amazing Digital Circus is a good show. Maybe not a great one, and certainly not a perfect one, but it's one that I love. And Jax is an irreplaceable piece of what makes TADC what it is. I really, really love this show, and it wouldn't be the same without its colorful cast of characters, including this self-destructive purple rabbit. I feel really grateful that I have the opportunity to share my thoughts with all of you, and I hope that this video was able to give you some insight and serve as a good ending to this character analysis series. And I'm really, really looking forward to seeing what Gooseworks and Glitch have planned for the future. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. I had a lot to say for this one, and I know it was a little more pointed than usual, but if my Poppy Playtime videos have shown me anything, it's that you guys kinda like it when I'm pointed. So hopefully that was the case here. Please remember to subscribe so I know that you liked what you saw, and if you want to talk to me about the video more directly, make sure you tune in for my after party live stream on Twitch. I look forward to seeing you there. And if you'd like to support my videos with your own money, I have a Patreon, a place where you can get exclusive updates on my plans and ideas, early and ad-free access to videos, including a very big future rewrite, and so much more. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of my patrons, including, but not limited to, Perplexia Sphinx, Snick, Tree, Lurch18489, Sphinx, I May Be Dumb, Cassidy the Puppet Wraith, and Gibbous Rat. And thank you all once again for watching. Take care of yourselves and each other, and I hope to see you all again soon. Bye!